Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It really helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. It was December 23rd, just after 6 in the evening, and the first snow of the season had fallen lightly over the village. The streets were quiet, coated in a thin layer of white that made everything look softer, muffled. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped outside, wanting to breathe in the crisp air and watch the snow settle on the rooftops and the bare branches of the trees. The village felt like it was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, leaving only the sound of the snow crunching faintly under my boots. At first, everything seemed peaceful. I wandered toward the center of the village, where the little square opened up between the houses. The street lamps cast a warm yellow glow, reflecting off the snow, and the windows of the houses glimmered with lights, showing shadows of people inside moving quietly. But as I turned a corner near the old bakery, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. Shadows were moving in the square. At first, I thought they were children playing, sliding along the snow, maybe singing carols. But the way they moved was strange. They moved perfectly in sync, side by side, bending and swaying as if guided by a single invisible hand. The snow around them stayed untouched, as though the ground itself was afraid to break their rhythm. I blinked and shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. I could see their shapes clearly, the outline of people in coats and scarves, holding invisible songbooks and moving their heads together. I waited for a moment, straining to hear the sound of their singing, but there was nothing. The village was silent, the way it sometimes was on cold winter evenings, yet these shadows seemed alive, aware of me. My heart started to beat faster, but curiosity pushed me forward. I wanted to see closer, to understand what I was seeing. As I approached, the shadows seemed to notice me. Or maybe they were always aware, I'm not sure. They split apart, moving as though the air itself had weight and they could push through it. My chest tightened as I realized the shadows were reaching toward me, stretching long and thin, their edges flickering slightly in the lamplight. I froze. My legs felt heavy, as if the snow under my boots had suddenly turned to glue. The shadows stretched farther, moving faster now, creeping closer, yet still silent. Panic surged, and I turned to run. I ran through the narrow streets of the village, my boots slipping on the icy patches, the snow falling harder now. The shadows followed, stretching and crawling along the ground behind me, always just out of reach but always present. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my own front door, fumbling with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. When I finally got inside, I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath and calm the pounding of my heart. That's when I noticed something that made me freeze again. Footprints in the snow led all the way to my door. Not just any footprints, they were mine. Every ridge and mark of my boots, perfectly matching. My mind reeled. I hadn't left yet. I hadn't gone outside yet. I remembered locking the door from the inside, but the prints were there, clear in the snow, leading up to my doorstep as if I had walked there hours ago. I pressed my hand to my face, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone had been playing a trick, someone had walked in my boots? But no, there was no one. Not a single person. And the shadows outside were gone, dissolved into the snow and darkness, leaving only the footprints as proof. I sat down at the kitchen table, the room lit by a single lamp, staring at the window. The snow fell quietly now, a soft, steady drizzle covering the village again. I couldn't explain what I had seen. No one else in the village would believe me. The streets were empty when I peeked outside, no children, no moving shadows. It was just the snow, the houses, and the faint glow of lamps in the distance. I tried to calm myself by thinking logically. Maybe the shadows were just tricks of the light, reflections in the falling snow. Maybe my mind had played a cruel joke on me, seeing motion where there was none. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just imagination. The footprints were there, undeniable, and they had not been mine earlier. I decided I couldn't stay in that kitchen all night. I needed to see the snow again, to check the paths, the streets, to confirm that what I had witnessed wasn't real. I wrapped myself in my coat, pulling the scarf around my neck, and stepped back outside. The snow had continued to fall, softening the footprints on the ground, but the ones leading to my door were still visible, faint but unmistakable. They stretched back to the corner of the street where I had first seen the shadows. I followed them slowly, carefully, every step crunching in the snow. The village was quiet, unnervingly quiet. The houses were dark, the windows blank and lifeless. When I reached the square again, the place where I had seen the shadows moving, I found nothing. No shadows, no strange movement, only the snow-covered cobblestones glistening in the lamplight. I knelt down and traced the prints with my gloved fingers. They were deep, solid, like someone had really walked there, but again I had not. I sat there for a long time, watching the snow fall, my heart slowly starting to settle. It was a calm, quiet night, and for the first time since I ran, the village felt ordinary again. I realized that whatever I had seen, it wasn't going to repeat itself, at least not tonight. I rose, brushed the snow from my coat, and made my way home. Back inside, I made tea, the warmth from the kettle filling the small kitchen, and I wrapped myself in a blanket by the window. The snow continued to fall, smooth and soft, covering everything in white. I thought about the shadows, about the footprints, and slowly, a sense of understanding began to settle in. I didn't know what had caused them, or why they had appeared just for me. Maybe it was the way the fading light and fresh snow played tricks on perception, or maybe it was something else, something that didn't need to be explained to be real. And maybe that was okay. Life in a small village could be strange, especially in the deep winter. The world wasn't always orderly, and sometimes strange things happened that didn't make sense. I watched the snow continue to pile up, softening the footprints until they were barely visible, merging with the smooth white blanket of the street. I felt a quiet relief knowing that the moment had passed, and the village returned to its ordinary stillness. I realized that I had faced something unexplainable and had survived it without harm. I could still remember the shapes, the reaching shadows, and the panic I felt, but it no longer held power over me. It became a memory, strange and vivid, but part of the ordinary life of the village. By the time I went to bed, the snow was falling steadily, covering the village completely in white. The footprints that had terrified me were gone, melted under fresh snow, leaving no trace. And as I lay in my bed, I felt a quiet sense of closure. I had seen something extraordinary, something that defied explanation, but it had not hurt me. The shadows, the prints, the strange silence, they were gone. The world outside my window was calm again, simple and ordinary, and I could finally rest, knowing that the snow, the village, and I were safe, at least until the next snowfall. It wasn't a story of horror or danger in the long term. It was a reminder that the world could be strange, even in the most familiar places, but that strangeness didn't always stay. Sometimes it passed, leaving only memory and the quiet comfort of ordinary life to fill the space behind it. I remember waking up in the middle of the night on December 25th, right around 3 in the morning. The house was silent, the kind of silence that makes every creak and groan sound louder than it really is. I had been half asleep, dreaming about the leftover Christmas cookies and wrapping paper strewn across the living room, when I heard it, a faint thumping coming from the fireplace. At first, I thought it was the heating system, the way it sometimes kicked in with a heavy groan during cold Ontario nights. But this sound was different. It wasn't mechanical, it had a slow, deliberate rhythm, like someone knocking from inside. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, trying to make sense of it. The room was dark, just the dim glow of the streetlights through the curtains. The thumping continued, slow, measured, and unsettling. It wasn't a normal sound for a fireplace, especially one that hadn't had a fire lit in weeks. My curiosity got the better of me, so I slid out of bed and padded across the cold wooden floor toward the living room. The closer I got, the stronger a strange smell became, a mix of smoke, burnt sugar, and something else I couldn't place at first. There was a sweetness to it that should have been pleasant, but there was decay underneath, sour and unsettling. The fireplace was empty of logs. I had cleaned it thoroughly after last winter. The hearth was covered in gray ashes, cold to the touch, yet somehow there was the faint scent of something still smoldering. I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my chest. That's when I saw it. A face, blackened as if coated in soot, peered at me from just above the ashes. Its features were human but distorted, like the image was warped by smoke. It stared at me with impossible stillness. I froze, unable to move, my heart hammering in my chest. I could feel the heat of the fire pit radiating slightly, though there was no flame, just ashes. The face moved slightly, tilting its head as if studying me. The smell intensified, the sweet decay now filling the small space around me. Then it whispered, "Merry Christmas." The sound wasn't loud, but it carried in the room like a hammer in my head. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to obey. And just as suddenly as it appeared, the face was gone. I stepped back, gasping, my eyes darting across the living room for some explanation. There was nothing unusual, only the cold fireplace and the faint wisp of smoke lingering in the air. Then I noticed the ashes. Handprints. Two clear, blackened imprints where fingers had pressed down as though someone had been trying to climb out or reach for me. I leaned down, brushing a finger across one of them. The ash crumbled at my touch, but the print had been deep, deliberate. I stepped away and tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a hallucination caused by being half awake and overly tired from the holidays. But the smell didn't vanish, and the handprints remained, stark against the gray ashes. I turned on the lights and examined the fireplace closely. There was nothing inside, no cracks I hadn't noticed before, no hidden compartment. The chimney was normal, a standard suburban setup, but the soot seemed darker than it should have been, almost glossy. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the handprints, my hands shaking, my chest tight with adrenaline. I even checked the outside of the house, the roof, the top of the chimney. Nothing. No footprints in the snow, no signs of anyone having been on the roof, nothing to explain how a human face could have appeared in the fireplace. I spent the next hour checking everything in the house, listening carefully for any hint of movement, but the house was quiet again. I forced myself to sleep back in my room, but every creak of the old house made me flinch. When I woke later, sunlight was creeping through the curtains. I went to the fireplace again, half expecting the handprints to have disappeared, but they were still there, faint now, like shadows pressed into the ash. The next few days, I researched fireplaces and chimneys, trying to find anything that could explain what I saw. Chimney fires, smoke backdrafts, visual hallucinations caused by carbon monoxide. Everything seemed plausible, yet none of it fully fit. The face, the whisper, the handprints, no logical explanation covered all three. I decided to clean the fireplace thoroughly again, removing all the ashes and soot. As I did, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. The bricks inside the fireplace weren't just blackened from use. Some had small, almost circular depressions. Tiny divots that looked like something had been pressed into the surface repeatedly over the years. I ran my hand over them, and the grooves felt slightly sticky. Not soot sticky, but more like hardened residue. I scraped a small piece off and examined it. It smelled faintly sweet, like burnt sugar. It was then I realized what might have happened. Over the years, soot, creosote, and ash had built up unevenly. Occasionally, when the air pressure in the house changed, something in the chimney, maybe the way the smoke or gases swirled, could create patterns, shadows, and reflections. My mind, half asleep and stressed from the holiday, could have shaped that into the face I saw. The whisper might have been my own mind interpreting the sound of air shifting or ash falling. The handprints? Possibly old smudges in the ashes I had never noticed until my heightened fear made me see them as recent. I felt relief wash over me, a cold but steady sense of reason grounding me. I had imagined it, my mind playing tricks in the darkness. And yet, there was still a lesson in the fear I had felt. I started taking the fireplace more seriously, cleaning it more often, making sure the chimney was inspected annually. I installed a small smoke detector in the living room, not because I expected ghosts, but because the fear had reminded me of how quickly a fire could become dangerous. By the next Christmas, I had rebuilt my sense of safety in that house. The fireplace was spotless, the chimney inspected, and I no longer feared the thumps of settling wood or shifting air. That December, I stayed awake until sunrise, sipping tea and listening to the quiet of the morning. The house creaked, the wind rattled the windows, but the fear was gone. I could even laugh at how powerful my imagination had been, how a small shift of light and shadow could make me see something terrifying. Over time, I told the story to friends and family, emphasizing the handprints and the face. They all laughed at first, thinking it was a simple scare. But I always ended the story the same way, that sometimes our minds can take ordinary things and turn them into nightmares, but understanding and careful attention can bring back peace. I never saw the face again, and the handprints never reappeared after I cleaned the fireplace properly. That winter, and all the winters after, the fireplace became just a fireplace again, a source of warmth and comfort, nothing more. The experience left a mark, but a good one. It taught me to respect the house, to notice small details, and to not let fear control me. And every Christmas after that, I would sit in the living room by the fireplace, hot cocoa in hand, remembering that cold, terrifying night. I knew the fear had been real in the moment, but it also taught me how resilient I could be. I could face the unknown, even when it felt like it was staring right at me from the ashes. And that knowledge was a gift, far more valuable than any present under the tree. By the time the sun fully rose, the house was bathed in light. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced by the crisp winter air flowing through the open windows. I felt safe again, grounded in reality, and more aware of how easily fear can twist the mind. The fireplace, once a source of terror, had become a reminder of clarity, patience, and the importance of seeing things as they are. That Christmas, I finally slept peacefully, knowing that the house, the chimney, and I were all intact, nothing supernatural lurking, just a lesson learned, a story told, and peace restored. It was December 24th, just past 11:30 at night, and the quiet of my small Vermont town was complete. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that bit at your face no matter how many layers you wore. My breath formed clouds that disappeared almost instantly into the black sky, and the snow beneath my boots crunched loudly, breaking the stillness in the most audible way. I was outside, putting up the last string of lights on my porch. The ladder wobbled under me as I reached for the top corner, my gloves stiff with cold. I had spent the entire evening decorating, trying to make the house look warm and inviting, even if no one would come by to see it this year. The town was small, almost empty during the holidays, and most of my neighbors were off visiting family. As I leaned back to admire the new lights, I thought I heard something faint in the distance, a soft, melodic sound that was almost swallowed by the wind. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the snow making strange noises as it fell and shifted. Then slowly it became clearer. Singing. Quiet, steady, almost hypnotic. I froze, listening, trying to place the sound. It wasn't coming from any of the houses nearby. The street in front of my house was empty, blanketed in fresh snow that glistened in the dim porch light. I set the ladder aside and walked to the door, my boots leaving heavy prints in the fresh snow. I opened it and stepped onto the porch, peering into the darkness. The song was still there, soft and calm, yet somehow heavy with a weight that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My curiosity got the better of me. I had to know who was out there, even though the rational part of my mind told me to go back inside, lock the door, and ignore it. I slipped my hands into my pockets and stepped down from the porch. The street was silent except for the singing. It seemed to float from the snow-covered road, coming closer and farther at the same time. I followed it, walking slowly so as not to make too much noise. Each step sank slightly into the soft snow, leaving a trail behind me. The song didn't have words I could understand. It was more like humming, a tune that could have been familiar, but distorted in a way that made it feel wrong. I walked past a few houses, their windows dark, curtains drawn tight. I glanced at each one, half expecting to see someone looking back at me, but there was nothing. The snow grew deeper as I moved further down the road. The singing led me without hesitation, almost as if it was guiding my steps. After a while, I noticed footprints in the snow. They weren't mine. They were human, but the prints were strange. The spacing was uneven, as though whoever had made them had walked in a rush at some points and slowly at others. They led straight into the woods at the end of the street. My heart started to race. I paused, the wind whistling through the trees, and looked at the dark line of forest in front of me. The footprints disappeared into it and didn't come out the other side. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but the song had stopped for just a moment, then returned, louder and closer. I realized I wasn't hearing it from the woods. I was hearing it from behind me. The hairs on my neck prickled. Slowly, I turned around. The street was still empty. My breath hitched. The lights on my porch flickered from the wind, but the house itself was silent. Yet the sound was there, coming from the direction of my front door. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen anyone, but the singing was unmistakable. It was inside my house. I hesitated for what felt like an eternity, then pushed the door open. The hall was dark. The soft glow from the porch lights barely reached inside. I held my hand up to my eyes, straining to see anything. The song was soft, almost whispering, filling every corner of the house. It didn't feel like it came from a single point. It felt like it was everywhere. I stepped inside, my boots leaving wet marks on the floor, and closed the door quietly behind me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. I had to find the source. My eyes darted around the living room. The furniture was covered in shadows, and the snow outside reflected dim light through the windows. The singing continued, slow, deliberate, and chilling in its calmness. I followed the sound from the living room to the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The song was clearer here, more distinct, like someone was humming just behind my shoulder. I checked the bedrooms, the bathroom, even the basement door. No one. Nothing. I could see my own reflection in the dark windows, and my own eyes looked back at me, wide and tense. The song shifted slightly as I moved, always keeping just out of reach, just around a corner or behind a door. I began to notice small things I hadn't before. The curtains in the living room swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. The floorboards creaked in places I hadn't walked on yet. The air smelled faintly of pine, like the wreath on my front door, but mixed with something metallic, almost like iron. I realized then that the singing wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from all the surfaces in the house, the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Each note echoed softly, as if vibrating through the wood and plaster itself. I ran my hand along the wall, and the vibrations tickled my fingertips. My mind raced. There had to be a logical explanation. A radio, maybe, left on in a hidden corner, though I hadn't seen one. A neighbor playing music from outside? But the street was empty. Panic began to rise, but I forced myself to think. I had spent hours decorating my porch earlier, stringing lights, moving boxes of ornaments, running extension cords. Maybe something I had disturbed outside had caused this. My eyes fell on the ceiling near the hallway. There, faint in the dim light, I could see tiny black dots along the edge of the molding. In the past weeks, I had noticed more and more birds nesting around the roofline, but I never saw any inside the house. Suddenly, the sound made sense, not entirely but partially. Birds could make a chirping sound, but this was too melodic, too human-like. I kept moving, tracing the sound to the kitchen. The room was empty, except for the fridge humming and the sink full of dishes. But then I noticed the small speaker I had forgotten about on the counter. It was covered in a light dusting of flour from earlier baking. I picked it up. It was on, playing a recording of carolers I had used weeks ago to test holiday playlists. My relief was instant but fleeting. The recording had been set on a timer to play only until 11. That was over half an hour ago. The volume was low, but perfectly clear. I turned the speaker off, expecting the house to fall silent. And for a moment it did. But then I heard it again, faint, coming from upstairs this time. My heart sank. I climbed the stairs slowly, hand brushing along the railing. The hallway at the top was empty. I paused, listening. The song stopped. My pulse raced. I was about to turn around when a soft creak came from my bedroom door. I froze. No wind could have done that. The house was still. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was dark, the bed neatly made, the snow-dusted street visible through the window. I scanned the room and then noticed the closet door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing moved, nothing breathed. The song wasn't in the closet. My stomach twisted. Then I heard it again, clearer than ever, echoing softly behind me. I spun around, my eyes falling on the mirror across from the door. And I saw it. Not a person, not a shadow, not a ghost, but a faint vibration in the reflection itself. The lights in the mirror flickered in sync with the soft humming. I realized then what had been happening the entire night. The sound had come from the house itself, pipes, walls, floorboards, all settling under the weight of snow outside, freezing and contracting. The house was alive in its own way, shifting and creaking, creating harmonics that sounded exactly like singing. My mind raced at first, trying to reconcile the eerie perfection of the notes with reality. I sat down on the edge of the bed, shaking, finally understanding. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't someone following me. The house had simply made the perfect sound at the perfect time, playing on the echoes and the silence of the night. I laughed quietly, tension leaving my shoulders in slow waves. The relief was overwhelming. I checked every room once more, ensuring no intruder could be hiding. The house was mine entirely. By the time I went back downstairs, the snow had stopped, leaving only the faint glimmer of ice on the road. I went outside, looked at my porch lights, and for the first time that night felt at peace. The strange, haunting melody was gone. The house creaked occasionally as it always had, but the terror had left with the night. I realized then, shivering in the crisp December air, that sometimes fear was just the mind misreading the world. The night had been long and tense, but I had faced it alone, and the only thing that had haunted me had been my own imagination, amplified by the eerie, resonant voice of my house. I went inside, closed the door, and finally allowed myself to rest, knowing that tomorrow, when the sun rose and covered the snow in light, the world would feel calm again. The silent carolers were nothing more than the house itself, singing one last song before the night ended. I had been looking forward to this night for weeks. Miami Beach was packed with people, the boardwalk glowing under a sea of streetlights and neon signs from nearby shops and restaurants. The air smelled of salt water, sunscreen, and fried food, a mix that somehow made everything feel alive and electric. I walked slowly along the boardwalk, weaving through the crowd, trying to get close enough to the railing to see the ocean clearly. Everyone around me was buzzing with excitement, laughing, taking pictures, holding drinks, and pointing at the dark sky that was slowly preparing itself for the midnight fireworks show. I could hear music from some nearby bars drifting across the sand, and the occasional shout or cheer from kids chasing each other along the wooden planks. I found a small patch near the railing where I could get a decent view. The waves below reflected the dim lights from the boardwalk, creating long streaks of silver and gold on the water. I felt a strange thrill standing there, the kind that comes right before something spectacular happens. Around me, people were starting to look up, and I followed their gaze. The sky was still dark, but I could already sense it building, that quiet tension right before a storm, or in this case, before fireworks. Then the first firework exploded. A sharp, bright burst of red and gold opened above the ocean, scattering light across the water. The crowd gasped and clapped, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with salt and food. I smiled, letting myself get lost in it for a moment. But as I turned slightly to adjust my phone to record the display, I noticed something. A shadow. It was just at the edge of the crowd, half hidden between people and umbrellas, but I felt it immediately, the way you notice something out of place. It wasn't moving like anyone else. It was following me. I froze for a second, convincing myself it was my imagination. Maybe the way the light hit the people behind me made it look like someone was keeping pace with me. But every time I moved a little, the shadow moved in the same way, keeping exactly the same distance. I changed direction slightly, stepping toward the right, and it mirrored me almost perfectly, like a reflection in a dark, distorted mirror. I told myself to shake it off. There were hundreds of people, and someone just happened to be walking in the same direction as me. But I couldn't stop noticing it. It was there through the second firework, and the third, always at the edge of my vision. I tried to look directly at whoever it was, but the crowd blocked my view. Each time I thought I had caught sight of a face, it disappeared behind someone else. The fireworks were getting bigger, louder. The air seemed to vibrate with the sound, and each explosion painted the ocean in bright colors. I felt my pulse quicken, partly from excitement and partly from the strange feeling that I was being watched. I tried to focus on the show, to tell myself I was overthinking it. The people around me were cheering, taking pictures, smiling. It was supposed to be a joyful moment. But the shadow never left. I walked closer to the railing, trying to see if I could spot anything unusual in the crowd. My heart started beating faster. Every step I took, it followed. I even stopped suddenly, pretending to tie my shoe, and the shadow stopped too, the timing so precise it made my skin crawl. By now, I felt trapped in a small invisible space, like a fish in a bowl, with the shadow circling just outside my line of safety. Then the countdown began. 10 seconds to midnight, everyone around me shouting and laughing, the energy building like electricity in the air. I glanced at my watch. 11:59 p.m. One more minute until the big fireworks, the ones everyone had been waiting for. My stomach twisted. I knew I had to see who, or what, was following me. When the first explosions of the midnight show went off, huge bursts of blue, green, and gold lighting up the night sky, I turned sharply to face the shadow. My eyes caught movement. A person was standing there, partially hidden behind the crowd. My stomach sank. They weren't hiding in a natural way. They were deliberately standing, so they could watch me without being noticed. And then I saw it. They were holding a phone, recording. At first, it didn't seem unusual. People always recorded fireworks. But the screen on the phone made me stop breathing. I froze, staring. The image on the phone wasn't showing what I was seeing. It wasn't showing me standing here, surrounded by hundreds of people, cheering and laughing. It was showing me standing alone. The boardwalk was empty except for me. No lights from shops, no people clapping, no waves glinting in the moonlight. Just me, in the middle of an empty boardwalk, perfectly still. My own figure, reflected like a ghost in a world that didn't exist. I took a step back, my legs suddenly heavy, heart hammering. The shadow noticed I had seen the phone. They didn't react the way a normal person might. They didn't drop it, didn't hide it, didn't even flinch. They just stood there, holding it so I could see, almost like they wanted me to notice. I wanted to yell, to run, but my body froze. There was no one to yell at, not really. I turned slowly, trying to get a sense of where the person might go next. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Was it some kind of trick with mirrors or reflections? A camera glitch? An elaborate prank? I couldn't think clearly. The fireworks kept exploding, booming in my chest, lighting up the waves below, but I barely noticed. I knew I had to get out of there. I moved sideways, weaving through the crowd, trying to stay between people so the shadow couldn't follow me too closely. My mind screamed at me to escape, but curiosity burned brighter. The phone was still trained on me, recording, showing that impossible empty boardwalk. Every step I took, the image changed, but it always mirrored my movements exactly, just in that empty, unreal version of the world. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that the shadow wasn't just following me. It was tracking me, documenting me. It was holding up a version of reality that didn't exist for anyone else. My fear shifted into something colder, something more calculating. I wasn't just being watched. I was being mapped, traced, observed in a way that no one else around me could see. Finally, the fireworks started to die down. The last few bursts exploded in brilliant gold and silver, reflecting on the water one last time. The crowd around me cheered, clapped, shouted, and slowly started moving back toward the streets and restaurants, the excitement fading into chatter. I stopped at the edge of the crowd, heart still racing, and turned to look for the shadow one last time. They were gone. No one was there. No phone, no figure, no trace of anything unusual. Just empty space where I had been staring. My legs trembled as I walked slowly toward the exit of the boardwalk. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The empty boardwalk, the recorded me, and the way that shadow had known exactly where to stand to make me see it. I didn't look back again. I left the boardwalk, blending into the crowd, trying to convince myself it was over, that maybe I had imagined it, that my mind had been playing tricks with the lights and shadows and excitement. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a trick. I could still feel the weight of the gaze on me, the way it had tracked my movements perfectly, like it knew me better than anyone else in that crowd. Later, back at my hotel, I replayed my own footage of the fireworks on my phone. I had recorded the crowd, the ocean, the explosions. Everything looked normal, exactly how it should have. But the memory of that phone, showing a version of reality where I stood completely alone, haunted me. I realized that some things could exist right in front of your eyes without anyone else seeing them, and that knowledge made me feel exposed in a way I had never felt before. I told myself I would be more careful. I would watch my back in public, notice my surroundings more, always be aware. Because that night, I had seen something impossible, something that existed in the edges of reality, and I knew one thing for sure. Someone somewhere had been following me, not physically but digitally, in a way that made the world itself seem like it was bending just around me. And that thought, more than any fireworks or crowds, stayed with me long after the noise had faded, long after Miami Beach was quiet again, long after the shadows had disappeared. I never saw the person again, never found any trace of them, but I carry that image with me every time I step outside, every time I feel the press of people around me. The fireworks show was over, the sky returned to black, and yet, for me, nothing would ever look quite normal again. The shadow had followed, the camera had captured, and I had learned a lesson in fear that didn't need ghosts or magic. It was simply the knowledge that sometimes someone is watching, and what they see isn't what the rest of the world sees. The clarity came slowly, in the quiet mornings afterward. I realized I didn't need to understand it fully to protect myself. Awareness became my shield. I learned to move differently, to notice the spaces behind me, to feel the weight of eyes even when no one was there. The fear that night had been real, sharp and present, but so had my control. And that was enough. I had survived the impossible, walked away into the normal world again, and even if the shadow was still out there, I knew I could face it, because now, I knew exactly what it wanted, to be seen, and I had seen it. I walked on, leaving the boardwalk and the echoes of that night behind me, carrying only the lesson. Some dangers don't shout, they follow quietly, and the best way to survive is to notice them before they reach you. I woke up to shouting, laughter, and the sound of champagne popping. My family was in the living room, crowded together, raising glasses and cheering. "Happy 2025, they yelled in unison. I froze in my bed, blinking, my heart beating fast. I reached over to my phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed with the date, December 31st, 2024. I rubbed my eyes and checked again. No mistake. My phone, my tablet, even the digital clock on the microwave downstairs all said 2024. I sat up slowly, confusion twisting my stomach into knots. I got out of bed, my feet cold against the hardwood floor, and walked to the living room. My parents and younger siblings were still cheering, hugging, and laughing. The decorations, the confetti on the floor, the smell of spiced cider and cookies, all of it looked exactly like a New Year's Eve party should, except the year everyone was celebrating was wrong. 2025. Are you okay? My mom asked, a puzzled smile on her face as she reached for me. Her voice sounded normal, friendly, but there was something in her eyes that didn't feel right. She wasn't blinking as naturally as usual, almost like she was holding something back. I shook my head and stepped back. I went to the window, pulling aside the curtain. Outside, the street looked normal, too normal. Snow covered the lawns and sidewalks in the same uneven patterns I remembered from earlier in December. The street lights flickered the same way they always did. My neighbor's mailbox was broken on one side, just as it had been since last year. A group of people walked past my house, bundled up in coats and scarves, carrying grocery bags and chatting. But then I realized they weren't moving the way people move. They were frozen like mannequins, standing with small smiles on their faces, staring directly at me. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back from the window. I grabbed my phone again, trying to call someone. I dialed my best friend's number, my hands shaking, but the call didn't go through. I tried my sister. Nothing. My father. The call rang, and then went straight to voicemail. No one answered. It was as if everyone in the world outside had just stopped. I opened the news app on my phone. Headlines for 2025 were scrolling, but they were all generic, nonsensical sentences that didn't make sense, like, the sun rises as usual in the first month of 2025, and local man continues normal life on first day of 2025. Panic started rising in my chest. I needed to know if anyone else noticed this, if anyone else could see the wrong year. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, my boots crunching in the snow. The cold bit into my face, and I could see my breath in the icy air. I looked down the street. People were still standing frozen, facing me. Some had coffee cups in hand, others had shopping bags. One man had a small child with him. Their faces were all the same, smiling, staring utterly still. I walked closer to the nearest person, calling out their name. No response. I reached out to touch the man's arm, and it was icy cold, like a mannequin made of some hard plastic. I recoiled immediately. I ran down the street, desperate for any sign of life. Houses that should have been bustling with neighbors preparing for New Year's Eve were dark. Cars were parked in driveways, untouched, tires half buried in snow. I saw a dog walking down the street, but it froze mid-step as soon as it noticed me, staring with eyes that seemed empty and distant. I decided to go back home, feeling the panic climb. When I entered the living room, my family was still celebrating. My little sister was laughing and clapping. My father poured himself another drink. Everything looked normal. I felt like I was losing my mind. I grabbed the calendar off the wall and stared at it. December 31st, 2024. Everything in my home said 2024. But my family's voices, their laughter, even the way they toasted in the living room, all screamed 2025. I needed proof. I ran to the computer and opened the webcam. I tried to video call a friend, someone who could confirm what year it was. I typed furiously, heart pounding. The screen froze. Every application I opened displayed random numbers and letters, with occasional flashes of 2025 in bold. My own reflection in the black screen of the monitor looked strange, slightly distorted, like someone had stretched it subtly without me noticing. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed. Time felt wrong. I paced the house, checked clocks, phones, digital assistants. Every device said 2025. Every external thing, the snow, the street, the frozen people, even my own memories, said 2024. My mind screamed, but I couldn't make sense of it. I wondered if I was dreaming, but the cold in my fingers and the crunch of the snow outside felt too real. Then I noticed something small but different. My calendar had a mark I didn't remember making. A red circle around December 31st with my own handwriting, except the handwriting was messy, almost panicked. I didn't remember writing it. Underneath a note, check the lights. Confused, I went to the fuse box in the basement. The lights were flickering in a rhythm that seemed deliberate. I touched the switch. A faint humming vibration ran through the walls. I remembered an old habit my grandfather had mentioned once. He used to reset clocks manually during power outages. It was strange, outdated, but I decided to try something similar. I shut off the electricity to the house entirely, plunging it into silence and darkness. For a few seconds, everything felt heavier, thicker. The frozen people outside remained unmoving, staring. Then slowly, I flipped the main switch back on. The lights flickered, then steadied. I checked my phone. 2024, the calendar was normal. My family was moving naturally again. My sister laughed and knocked over a cup of cider by accident, her movements chaotic and real. The people outside walked by, talking, laughing, doing exactly what people normally do. It was like nothing had ever been wrong, except that I remembered. I sank onto the couch, exhausted, shaking. My heart still raced, but the world was back. Normal, real, and undeniable. The wrong year had disappeared. I didn't know how it had happened or why. Maybe it had been a glitch in some network, some rare temporal anomaly, or maybe it had been my mind playing tricks after too many late nights and too much excitement about the new year. Whatever it was gone now. I looked at my family sitting around the living room, smiling and chatting. The warm glow of the lights, the smell of spiced cider, and the faint tick of the clock were comforting. I realized then that no one else would ever know what had happened. It would just be a memory I carried alone, a strange, terrifying reminder that reality wasn't always as solid as it seemed. I took a deep breath, feeling my muscles relax for the first time in hours. I knew I had to let it go. I joined my family, lifting a glass to the clock that now ticked steadily toward midnight, and for the first time since I had woken up, I laughed. The world had returned to normal, and I would face it with the understanding that reality could surprise me in ways I couldn't explain, but I could survive it. The wrong year had come and gone, and now, finally, the present felt real again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching my family celebrate, every laugh and movement reassuring me that the frozen, smiling world outside had truly been gone. By morning, everything was normal, the snow fresh and untouched, the mailbox still broken, but life moving naturally. I realized I had been given a rare, terrifying glimpse of something fragile, something that could slip if I didn't notice. And somehow, that made the ordinary, messy, human world feel even more precious. I didn't understand it, but I didn't need to. I just needed to be here now in 2024, surrounded by my family, alive, and able to breathe. And for the first time that night, I felt truly grateful. It was just 2 minutes before midnight, and the city was alive. From my apartment on the 23rd floor, Manhattan looked like a living, breathing organism. The streets glowed with the reflection of fireworks bouncing off glass towers, and the hum of car engines mixed with distant cheers and the occasional horn. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, a glass of sparkling cider in my hand, listening to the muffled chaos below. It was New Year's Eve, the kind where the city never truly sleeps, and I was alone, enjoying the rare peace of solitude. My phone buzzed. I glanced down and froze. The screen showed a text from my own number. My thumb hovered over the screen, my stomach twisting. I opened it. "Don't look out the window." I laughed nervously. My first thought was some prank, probably a friend who had somehow spoofed my number. I told myself it was funny, harmless, nothing to be scared about. I set my glass down and leaned back against the counter, trying to shake off the weird unease curling in my chest. Manhattan was chaotic, sure, but this was my home. I lived on the 23rd floor. I could see almost everything. There was no one else in the building at this hour. Still, the message clung to my mind, nagging like a quiet, insistent whisper. I told myself not to think about it, but then out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Across the skyline, somewhere between the edges of the building opposite mine and the reflection of the fireworks, a shadow moved. I blinked. My heart started hammering. The shadow shifted again, briefly outlined by the strobing bursts of light from fireworks. I froze. The rational part of my brain argued it was a trick of the lights, the way the city reflected off glass surfaces. I told myself to step back, to look away, to stop overthinking. But the movement didn't stop. My eyes traced it carefully, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but each time the fireworks lit the night sky, the silhouette appeared again, shifting closer. The text flashed in my mind again. "Don't look out the window." My breathing became shallow. I wanted to turn away, to ignore it, to convince myself that no one could possibly be there. And yet, curiosity mixed with fear, a dangerous cocktail, and I couldn't stop looking. The shadow was too deliberate, too synchronized with the light to be a trick of reflection. Someone was out there. Someone had positioned themselves in a building opposite mine, and they were watching. I moved quietly to the corner of the room, trying to get a better angle without being obvious. My apartment was long and narrow, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a full view of the skyline. The fireworks burst again, and for a brief moment, I saw a figure clearly. Someone in dark clothing, standing perfectly still, looking straight at me. My heart jumped. I backed away instinctively. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my own number. "I see you." I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. I couldn't think clearly. I checked the locks on my door 3 times, even though I knew it was secure. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. The city below was loud, alive, but inside my apartment, the noise faded. Every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone, even though I should have been completely safe. I grabbed my laptop and frantically searched for the building opposite mine. It was an office tower, mostly empty at night. That meant the shadow was almost certainly a person. My mind raced. How had they known I'd be here? The text from my number made no sense. I didn't own an extra phone. No one else had access to my number. I tried calling 911, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I took a deep breath and dialed. The dispatcher answered quickly, and I gave my address in hurried, clipped sentences. I told them about the texts, the shadow, the building opposite. They assured me someone would check the area. It felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I hung up, feeling slightly calmer but still tense, aware of every flicker of light outside. Minutes crawled by, stretched thin by adrenaline. The fireworks continued below, oblivious to my fear. I kept my blinds partially closed, trying to obscure my apartment without cutting off the view entirely. The shadow moved again. It was deliberate, pacing slightly now, pausing to look at me each time the light shifted from the city. I realized then that I had to act. Sitting and waiting for the police felt dangerous. I needed to secure myself, to make the apartment as safe as I could. I checked every window lock, double-checked the door, and then grabbed a heavy metal bar I used to prop open a window for ventilation. It was ridiculous, but I wanted something to feel in my hands, some sense of control. Another text came through. "You can't hide." I threw the phone on the counter. My chest heaved. Whoever this was, they were close enough to see me clearly. My mind raced with scenarios, every rational explanation colliding with terrifying possibilities. Was it some hacker? Some obsessed stranger? The reality of Manhattan meant anything was possible. Then something unexpected happened. The shadow froze completely. The fireworks went off in rapid succession, turning the city into a strobe-lit stage, and for a moment, the figure didn't move at all. Then it turned and walked away from the window of the opposite building. I strained to see where they went, but the building's reflection and darkness swallowed them whole. I stayed on edge, trembling, until the police arrived. They were calm but thorough, checking every floor and making calls to surrounding buildings. They didn't find anyone suspicious in the office tower or nearby. They took my statement and promised to keep an eye on the area. The text stopped after that, no calls, no messages. By the time the fireworks ended and the city started to quiet down, I was exhausted. I sat on my couch, staring out the window at the skyline, still aware of how thin the line between safety and danger had felt. No one had been hurt, nothing had been broken, but the fear lingered, a cold shadow that refused to fade. I never found out who it was. No one knew how they had sent texts from my number. No one knew why they had chosen that exact moment to appear in my line of sight. It could have been some elaborate prank, a stalker, or someone with knowledge I couldn't begin to guess. But in that moment, I realized something fundamental. The city was alive in more ways than one. People were always watching, always moving, always capable of reaching you in ways that felt impossible. I stayed in that apartment for years after, never opening the blinds fully at night again, always checking the locks, always aware. The experience never became a story I laughed about. It was real, terrifyingly real. And though the texts never returned, the memory of that night stayed, clear and sharp, a reminder that danger doesn't always wear a mask or follow rules. Sometimes it just waits, patient, in the right window at the right moment. The lesson was simple and undeniable. Vigilance is not paranoia. Sometimes the world is dangerous in ways you can't predict, and the only thing that keeps you safe is careful attention, preparedness, and the willingness to act. That night on the 23rd floor taught me that. It taught me that even in a city of millions, isolation doesn't protect you. And most importantly, it reminded me that reality, unfiltered and unembellished, can be scarier than any story or myth because it follows no script, no pattern, and no warning. By sunrise, I was calmer, finally able to breathe. I made a list of safety measures, changed my locks, and secured my network. I watched the morning light reflect off the skyline, peaceful yet tinged with the memory of the previous night. Manhattan was awake, bustling, alive, and I had survived. More than survived, I had learned. That city could be dazzling, loud, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once, and in my own apartment on the 23rd floor, I had faced it. I had faced the unknown. And I had won, not through luck, but through careful, deliberate action. I never got another message from that number, never saw a shadow like that again, and eventually, I learned to live in the city without constant fear. But I never forgot how fragile that sense of safety can be, and how quickly a moment of normalcy can turn into something unthinkable. It changed me in ways subtle and lasting, shaping how I moved through the world, and how I understood the thin line between security and danger. I wasn't reckless anymore. I was alert, aware, prepared. And in that vigilance, I found a quiet kind of peace, knowing that even when the unexpected comes, I could face it, stand my ground, and come out alive. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also a night that taught me to live fully awake in a city that never sleeps. I stepped into the elevator of my building just before midnight, the familiar hum of the machinery underfoot comforting in a strange way. The lobby of my Times Square apartment building was bustling earlier in the evening, but now, at 11:55, it had emptied. My friends were waiting on the rooftop for the New Year's countdown, and I was eager to meet them. I pressed the button for the 24th floor, thinking about the energy of the crowd outside, the bright lights, and the fireworks I would soon see. The elevator started its slow ascent, with that usual mechanical groan. The first few floors passed normally, the numbers lighting up in sequence, and I checked my reflection in the mirrored walls. My face looked tired but excited, and I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm the nerves that always hit me before big gatherings. As the elevator moved past the 10th floor, I noticed the soft hum of the lights above me flicker for a moment. I frowned and shook it off as nothing more than a loose bulb. Then, as the elevator neared the 23rd floor, the motion jerked suddenly. The familiar upward hum stopped abruptly, and the elevator shuddered. I gripped the railing along the side and looked at the floor indicator. It hadn't moved. The lights flickered violently, casting the mirrored walls and fractured reflections like broken glass. A wave of unease passed through me, and I pressed the button again, thinking maybe it hadn't registered. Nothing happened. I tried my phone, hoping to call my friends or the building office, but my signal was gone. I could see the tiny symbol in the corner of the screen, empty and blinking. Panic started to edge in, but I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, trying to think rationally. Elevators stuck between floors happened, I reminded myself. It was not unusual, and there were procedures for this. I hit the emergency button. A dial tone hummed, then silence. Then a crackle, faint at first, but growing until I could hear it clearly. "You'll be counted out before the ball drops." I froze. My stomach sank. There was no one on the other end of the speaker, just that voice. Low, deliberate, and strange, almost mechanical. I swallowed hard, pressing the button again, my finger trembling. Nothing. I tried to calm myself, rationalizing it. It was probably a prank, someone in the building with access to the system. But the way the voice had sounded, it had felt too close, too precise, too knowing. The elevator jerked again and began moving, but not smoothly. It slowed, paused, then moved in fits and starts. I leaned back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Every time the lights flickered, I could see shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. My own reflection fractured in odd angles, multiplied by the mirrors. I could hear a faint sound, almost like laughter, echoing somewhere deep in the dark shaft above me. Not a person's laugh, too sharp, too hollow, but it was there, vibrating through the metal. The elevator stopped suddenly again, and the doors slid open with a slow, grinding squeal. I looked out, expecting the familiar polished floors of my building. Instead, there was only a long, empty corridor. The carpet was worn, the walls a dull beige with water stains in the corners. There was no light except for the weak glow from a single flickering bulb. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, like old pipes. The floor numbers were wrong, too. There was no marker to indicate which floor this was. Not my floor. Not any floor I knew. I stepped out cautiously, my shoes muffled by the thin carpet. The corridor was silent except for my own breathing and the distant hum of the elevator behind me, still sitting slightly ajar. I moved slowly, testing the doors along the hall, but they were all locked. Some were office-style doors, others looked like maintenance rooms. Everything was abandoned, like no one had walked these halls for decades. My heart pounded. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The battery was dropping faster than it should, and I felt a flicker of real fear now, the kind that twists your stomach. I realized I had no idea how long the elevator had been stuck or how far I had traveled in it. Maybe I had gone past my floor. Maybe I had gone somewhere else entirely. I tried to retrace my steps to the elevator, but the corridor seemed longer than it should be. It twisted in ways that didn't make sense, the walls bending slightly, disorienting me. I walked faster, my palms sweaty against the walls. I needed to find someone. Anyone. The sound of my own footsteps echoed back at me, too loud, too sharp, and I could swear I heard faint echoes of other steps behind me. I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, the building was old, and noises carried strangely. After what felt like forever, I reached a stairwell door and pushed it open. The stairs were concrete, narrow, and smelled damp. I descended cautiously, counting my steps, trying to get to a familiar floor. The metal railing was cold under my hands. At the bottom, the door led to another corridor, equally unfamiliar. I could see a faint light at the far end, and I ran toward it, hoping it was an exit. Finally, I reached a lobby, but it wasn't the one I had entered earlier. The layout was different, the furniture old and worn, the signage yellowed with age. A single receptionist desk sat empty, papers scattered across it. The glass doors in front of me showed Times Square outside, but it was blurred, almost like looking through a foggy window. I pushed through, and the sounds of the city at midnight finally reached me. Honking cars, voices, fireworks in the distance. I ran outside, the cold air hitting my face, and finally felt relief. My friends were already up on the rooftop, cheering as the ball descended. I climbed the building's service stairs to reach them, my legs trembling from adrenaline. When I stepped onto the rooftop, the city spread out around me in a dazzling panorama of lights and chaos. I realized the time had nearly struck midnight, but I had made it. Looking back toward the building, I understood what had happened. The elevator had glitched, sending me to a maintenance floor or an old service corridor that wasn't on the regular floor plan. The laughter I had heard was probably the building's old ventilation system echoing, the voice a distorted automated alert from a malfunctioning speaker. The fear had been real, yes, but it was the fear of isolation, of the unknown, not of something supernatural. I joined my friends as the countdown began, holding on to the warmth of their presence, the noise, the energy of the city. The ball dropped. Fireworks exploded in the distance, reflected in the glass of surrounding skyscrapers. I laughed along with everyone, my heart still racing, but now with relief instead of fear. I had been trapped in the dark, alone, unsure of where I was, but I had come out the other side, safe, grounded, and reminded of how quickly fear could take over when the mind fills in unknowns with worst-case scenarios. And even as the crowd roared around me, I kept one hand brushing against my pocket where my phone had been dead and silent for minutes. I smiled to myself, quietly proud that I had stayed calm enough to find a way out, to rely on logic, observation, and persistence. The elevator had been a terrifying moment, but in the end, it had not broken me. It had reminded me that even when everything seems uncertain, moving forward, step by step, could lead me back to solid ground. The night continued with music, laughter, and celebration, but I knew I would remember that elevator forever. Not as a haunted space, not as a ghost story, but as a moment where fear tested me, and I had made it through clearer, stronger, and grounded in the real world. I was sitting at my small desk in my bedroom, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the page in front of me. I had decided to make New Year's resolutions, trying to force some sense of control over the coming year. I scribbled down goals, crossed out ideas, wrote new ones, and paused every so often to stare out the window at the dark, empty streets of my Chicago neighborhood. The hum of the city was quiet at this hour, except for the occasional car passing by or the distant wail of a siren. My apartment complex was old, the walls thin, and I had always thought that I could hear almost everything happening next door, but tonight it felt different, heavier somehow. It was about 11:50 p.m. when I first heard it, a faint tapping at the window. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a branch from the old oak tree brushing against the glass. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I froze, pen in hand, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't strong, but it was there. I leaned closer to the window, heart starting to beat faster. Nothing. Just the dark reflection of my room in the glass, the streetlights casting long, pale streaks across the asphalt below. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was on edge from being alone all night. My neighbor lived in the apartment next door, the one that shared the thin wall of my living room. He was usually quiet, kept to himself, and I had only exchanged a few words with him when we bumped into each other in the hallway. I had never really thought much about him beyond the usual hello and polite nods. Tonight, though, the silence in his apartment seemed too complete, like it was a vacuum that had somehow crept through the walls into my room. Then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible at first, coming from the other side of the wall. "Alex," it said. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't mentioned my name to anyone for hours. No one was supposed to be in that apartment. I knew he had been home all night, alone. And yet, the voice came from next door, low and deliberate. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to convince myself it was some kind of trick my brain was playing on me. The apartment was small, but my living room stretched alongside the wall I shared with him. The faint sounds of movement began after that. Shoes scraping lightly across the floor, soft steps that didn't match the rhythm of the hardwood creaks I was used to hearing from my neighbors. It wasn't just the usual settling of the building, or the occasional thump from someone else walking past. It was deliberate, like someone was pacing, listening, waiting. I considered calling the police, but something about the thought made me freeze. What would I even say? I think my neighbor is what exactly? The words wouldn't form. I told myself it was probably nothing, that maybe I had just imagined it all. I tried to focus back on my resolutions, but my hand trembled as I wrote. The scraping continued, slow and measured. I could feel it vibrating through the floor, through the thin walls. Every now and then it stopped, and I held my breath waiting. Then it started again, moving closer to the shared wall, almost as if he was walking right along it, on my side. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards under his weight. I wanted to get up, to check, to look through the peephole in my door, but I was frozen. Something about the quiet made it impossible to think clearly. My mind raced through possibilities. He could have left his apartment. Maybe someone had let themselves in. Or maybe he was just awake and moving around. But the whisper of my name had been so clear, so intimate, that I couldn't shake the feeling that it was deliberate, that it was meant for me. I tried to convince myself to stay calm. I got up slowly, careful not to make any noise. I tiptoed to the living room, crouching near the window, peering out at the empty street. Nothing. Not a single person, no moving shadows, nothing but the soft glow of the streetlights and the occasional flicker of a passing car. I let out a slow breath, thinking maybe I had been imagining it. Maybe my mind had twisted the sounds of the city into something sinister. Then I heard it again, this time unmistakable. Scraping shoes, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor. And then a soft thud, like something heavy being dropped near the wall. My stomach dropped. I backed away from the window, heart hammering, and listened. I realized then that the noise wasn't coming from the hall outside. I knew my building, every creak, every shift of the structure, and this didn't match anything I had ever heard before. The sound was inside my apartment, or at least very close to it. I moved to the door, hand on the knob, ready to grab my phone and leave, but I stopped. The sound of the scraping stopped as well. Silence. Too quiet. My apartment felt heavy, like it was holding its breath along with me. I waited, and then very faintly, I heard the whisper again, right through the wall. "Alex." This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained the situation, trying to make sense of what I had heard. The operator tried to calm me, asking questions, promising officers would be on the way quickly. I hung up, clutching my phone, and started looking around the apartment for something to defend myself, something to feel in control. I grabbed a heavy lamp, holding it like a weapon, even though I hoped I wouldn't have to use it. Minutes passed. The scraping didn't start again, but I couldn't bring myself to move from the corner near the door. Every creak, every whisper of air from the vent, felt amplified, like it could be him walking silently across the apartment. I sat there, tense, trying to control my breathing, telling myself I was safe, that someone would be here soon. Finally, I heard voices in the hallway. Not just random noises, but actual voices, police, alert, calling out my name, asking if anyone was inside. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with fear. I unlocked the door slowly, stepping into the hall, and there they were, officers with flashlights, checking every apartment. They found nothing unusual in my neighbor's unit. Doors locked, lights off, nothing to suggest someone had been moving around. But one officer stayed back with me while the others checked the floors above and below. He explained that sometimes people hear things differently in old buildings, how sounds travel in strange ways through walls and floors, how our minds can fill in gaps with what we fear. I didn't really believe him, not completely. I had felt it, heard it, the whisper, the scraping. I knew what I had heard. But I also realized that no matter what, I was still alive, still safe. The fear had been real, yes, but it was over, and I had taken action. I had faced the unknown, even if the unknown turned out to be nothing in the end. I returned to my apartment that night, sitting at my desk once more. The lamp cast the same soft glow, the city hummed outside, quiet and indifferent. I didn't finish my resolutions. I didn't write another word. I just sat there listening, waiting, until exhaustion finally claimed me. By the next morning, the fear had faded, replaced by a cautious awareness. I realized that some nights are like that, filled with sounds and shadows, with moments that stretch your mind and test your courage. But in the end, the important thing is that you survive, that you face it, and that you remember you can handle more than you thought. I never saw anything, never found any explanation, but I didn't need one. The lesson was clear. Fear is loud, and sometimes it lives in your own mind. But courage, patience, and action, those are louder. And that night, I had found mine. I remember that night so clearly, the way it started normal and ended in a way I still can't explain. I had spent the evening getting ready, excited to see everyone at my friend's New Year's party. Their house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Philadelphia. I remember the streetlights casting long yellow streaks across the snow-covered sidewalks, and the cold wind biting at my cheeks as I unlocked my car and grabbed my bag. I had been looking forward to this party for weeks. Everyone had talked about it for days leading up to New Year's Eve. I had even brought a small bottle of champagne as a gift, thinking it would be a nice gesture. When I drove up, the first thing I noticed was that the house looked wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The driveway was empty. No cars parked, no laughter or music spilling out the windows. Usually, even from the street, you could hear the sounds of people moving around, talking, or music thumping through the walls. But this night, there was nothing. The house looked perfectly normal from the outside, neat and clean, but there was a strange stillness to it, like it had been frozen in time. I parked and walked up to the front door. I reached for the handle and realized it was unlocked. Normally, my friend was careful about locking the door, especially at night. I hesitated for a second, my stomach tightening. I called out their names softly, then a little louder. "Hey guys, I'm here." My voice felt awkward in the silence, bouncing back at me from the walls of the empty street. There was no answer, no footsteps, nothing. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled normal, warm, slightly of wood polish and faint cooking smells, but there was a stillness to it that made me uneasy. The hallway was dimly lit by the faint light of a street lamp coming through the windows. I could see the living room straight ahead. I thought maybe everyone had just gone upstairs or outside for a minute. When I entered the living room, I froze. The scene before me looked like it had been taken straight out of a picture of a party, except it wasn't happening. The living room was completely quiet. The furniture was arranged neatly, as if no one had touched it in hours. On the coffee table, there were bowls of chips and snacks, all untouched. I noticed a jacket draped over the back of a chair, shoes neatly lined up near the door, but not a single person was there. I called out again, my voice higher this time. "Hello? Anyone here?" Nothing. I moved toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The kitchen table was set for a dozen people. The plates were stacked perfectly, silverware placed just so. Glasses of champagne sat in their holders untouched. The champagne hadn't even been poured yet. It looked as if someone had prepared for the party, and then vanished. I walked closer, my heart thumping in my chest. I reached out to touch a glass, expecting it to feel cold from sitting out, but it was perfectly room temperature. Nothing was out of place, yet everything was wrong. Then I noticed the clocks. Every single clock in the house had stopped at 11:11 p.m. The wall clocks, the microwave, even my friend's digital alarm clock in the hallway. They all pointed to the same time. My pulse quickened. I backed up slowly, looking around, trying to understand what was happening. I turned toward the door, ready to leave, but the hallway seemed longer than I remembered. I walked toward it, but when I opened the door to step outside, I was back in the living room. I couldn't understand it. I tried every exit, the back door, the side door, the garage, but no matter which way I went, I ended up back in that same frozen living room. It was like the house had become a maze, each doorway twisting back on itself. The feeling of panic started to creep in. I ran from room to room, checking every closet, every bedroom, even the basement. Everything was empty, perfectly neat, untouched. It was as if the people had disappeared mid-step, leaving the house in a perfect snapshot. I started to notice small details I hadn't before. A jacket left open, as if someone had just removed it. A half-unwrapped candy bar on the counter. The ice cubes in the freezer tray still clinking together, as if waiting to be served. I touched the glasses again, careful this time, and saw faint condensation forming on the inside, like they had been recently chilled but never used. The house had been prepared for a party that never happened. Hours seemed to pass, though I couldn't be sure. I tried calling my friends on my phone. No answer. I tried texting, but the messages didn't seem to send. My phone even lost signal inside the house, which didn't make sense. I remember standing in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the table, trying to force myself to believe it was some kind of prank. Maybe they had taken the party somewhere else as a joke, and I had been left behind. But something in the air felt wrong. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was heavy, almost pressing against me from all sides. I finally stopped moving, sat on the edge of the couch, and just looked at the table. My mind was racing, thinking through every possible explanation. Had someone called off the party? Did everyone leave suddenly? But why would the clocks all stop at 11:11? Why did every exit bring me back here? My thoughts spun faster and faster, but I realized panicking wouldn't help. I needed to get out and figure this out. I decided to calm myself and try methodically again. I opened the front door, walked outside, counted my steps, and tried the back door again. Every route still led me back into the same living room, into the same frozen scene. The air didn't feel different, the lights didn't flicker, the clocks didn't move. I realized something important in that moment. The house itself wasn't normal. It wasn't some supernatural trap, it was broken. Maybe structurally, maybe electrically, maybe mechanically. But it had a flaw that kept looping me inside. I remembered the basement. Houses like this sometimes had old service tunnels or hidden passages. I went downstairs slowly, holding my phone for light. The basement was cluttered with old boxes and tools, dusty and cold. And there, in the far corner, I noticed a small door I had never seen before. It was slightly ajar, hidden behind a stack of old chairs. My heart raced again, but this time with a sense of purpose. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was a narrow corridor, just wide enough for one person. I walked carefully, following it as it curved sharply. After what felt like forever, I emerged at the back of the house, not inside but outside near the garage. I could see the street, the snow, the streetlights. Everything was normal again. I ran to my car, got in, and finally felt the relief wash over me. I drove away slowly, glancing back at the house. From the outside, it looked the same as always, perfectly normal, quiet, innocent. Later, when I tried to explain it, I realized I could never fully. No one believed me. I went back the next day during daylight, and everything seemed ordinary. The clocks worked, the doors opened normally, the house looked just like any other suburban home. The table was empty, the snacks gone, and there was no trace of the frozen party. I even asked my friends, who had been at a different location, and they laughed at me for being late. What I learned that night is that sometimes reality itself can feel wrong. A place can trap your mind even if no one else is there. And some mysteries don't have neat answers. The house wasn't haunted, nothing magical happened, but I still remember the stillness, the frozen glasses, the stopped clocks, and the way every exit led me back into that living room. It was a reminder that the world can sometimes feel stranger than anything you can explain, and that even in familiar places, you can feel completely lost. Even now, when I walk past that street or drive by houses in the suburbs, I think about that night. I think about the frozen party, the looping hallways, and the feeling of being trapped in a place that looks normal but isn't. And I remember one thing clearly. The only way out was to keep moving, stay calm, and find a way no one had thought to check. That night scared me, yes, but it also taught me something important. No matter how confusing or impossible a situation feels, there is always a way forward. You just have to find it, even if it's hidden behind a small door in the basement. The experience stayed with me, not as a story of ghosts or magic, but as a reminder that reality can be stranger than fiction, and sometimes the scariest things are the things that are perfectly real.